He just won the Republican primary for governor by only 83 votes and will face Democrat Jack Conway in the fall. We'll talk about a wide range of topics tonight with gubernatorial candidate Matt Bevin on Issues and Answers, the Mountain Edition.
Issues and Answers, the Mountain Edition, is sponsored by the City of Hazard. Come home to the mountains.
Republican gubernatorial candidate Matt Bevin, our guest tonight. Matt, good to see you.
Great to be here with you, really is. Thank you.
Well, obviously you're just coming off this historic primary. You won by 83 votes. What do you think put you over the top in the final weeks of that campaign?
I think it was a variety of things. The thing that's wonderful about 83 votes is that everyone in Kentucky thinks they were responsible for the 83 votes, and they're all right. That's the beautiful thing about it. It has reinfused a sense of belief in people that voting matters, that every vote counts, and it has kind of reinvigorated people's belief in the electoral process. So that's good. What put us over the top? We stayed on message. We really did. Throughout, from beginning to end, we ran on our blueprint for a better Kentucky, 7 key points that we continue to discuss about ways that we can broaden the economic base in this state. That, I think, at the end of the day, resonated with people, plus 83 extras. So,
well, for those who might not be that familiar with you, just give me briefly a little bit about your background, and I want to know how you have time to do anything, being the father of 9 children.
Well, I tell you, I am blessed on many fronts. I grew up in a pretty simple way. I was the second of 6 children. Grew up in a very rural setting, raising crops, raising animals. 4-H was pretty much my social life as a kid. And I was, taught to work hard, taught to respect God, respect my parents, respect other people. It was a pretty simple life, but a good life, and I'm grateful for that foundation. Paid my way through school. I went to Washington and Lee University in Lexington, Virginia. Had to pay my way through school. When I got out, I went into the military. I was an active duty Army officer for a number of years, but I got out 20-some years ago, and since that time I've been in the private sector. I'm a small business owner. I own all or part of 10 different companies. I like to take small companies, first maybe that are ideas that of my own or others that people have, and turn those into opportunities, create jobs. Sometimes they're companies that others have given up on. Maybe they're bankrupt, maybe they've been taken to the auction block. And I like to turn opportunities into jobs for people, because I know as a kid how much my dad always was grateful for the ability to have a job and what it meant to our family. I am married. I have 9 children. Today is actually my anniversary. So,
happy anniversary.
We're blessed. 9 children. We had 5. We cheated a little bit. We adopted 4 of those children after we had 5, and we've really. Once you have more kids than hands, it really doesn't change your life too terribly much. I can tell you that.
Well, Kentucky, as you know, traditionally votes for the Democrat in governor's races. So what do you think you have to do between now and November to win this thing?
I think we need to communicate with people that there is a real choice between me and the Democrat running in this race. Now, I'm a military veteran. He's not. I'm a guy who grew up working for a living. He didn't. I'm a guy who has created payroll and even now employs people and has created hundreds of jobs over the course of my life. He's never created a job, and in fact has worked very little in the private sector. Only time that he's worked in the private sector is for his dad in between political positions. So how do we win? We convince people who are conservatives in this state that there is a choice for somebody who understands where they're coming from, who has walked in their shoes, who understands what it is to be both socially and fiscally conservative, which is what 2/3 of Kentuckians are. And so communicating that message, I think, is what will help us to win this race.
Is one of your strategies going to be to tie Jack Conway to President Obama, because he has said that will not work?
He's already tied himself to President Obama, so I don't know how much I'll need to do it. I mean, there have been 2 peas in a pod on many, many issues. I'm going to run the race on who I am, what it is that I am proposing. I do encourage people, look at mattbevin.com. Don't wait until after Labor Day to start paying attention to this race. I mean, I really would challenge listeners and viewers to tune in and pay attention to this race and take a look at the blueprint for a better Kentucky. We'll talk about things like the pension crisis, which is critical in this state. And maybe we'll talk about these over the course of this discussion, but there are certain issues as it relates to the coal, as it relates to the way in which we deal with the EPA, as it relates to education, and as it relates to health care. There are very distinct differences between myself and Jack Conway in this race.
The GOP in Kentucky seems to be uniting around you, but one person described Senator Mitch McConnell's one-sentence endorsement of you as, quote, heartfelt and warm as a letter from the IRS. What is your relationship with Senator McConnell, and do you expect him to campaign for you? Of course, you ran against him last year in the U.S. Senate race.
I did, but I do. It's good. I've spoken to him in person since the election. He has been supportive, not only in writing, but verbally. He has provided good advice. He's a guy who knows a thing or two about winning statewide in Kentucky. I think he'll be supportive. He is the Senate Majority Leader. He has more than a little bit on his plate these days. I don't expect that he'll be stumping all over the state on my behalf, but he has said he'll be supportive. I expect that he will be, and I look forward to any help that he can provide.
Democrats are already going after you on this issue of cockfighting after you were on tape appearing at a pro-cockfighting event last year in Corbin, which is in our viewing area. Clear that up for me. Do you support cockfighting, and tell me what that was all about at that event that you spoke at last year?
I don't, and I've been clear every time I've been asked about it. I've never even been to a cockfight in my entire life. I spoke to a group of people who, among other things, apparently do find themselves supportive of cockfighting. I spoke about why I was running for office at that time, why if they were a Republican I'd appreciate their vote, and then I left. I've never attended any kind of an event. It's being brought up because that's literally all I have. You notice that the Democrats never talk about what their ideas are or what their proposals are. It's always what's wrong with the other guy. And that's unfortunately what happens a lot in politics. But to answer your question, I'm not supportive of it. I do think it's a states' rights issue. That's what I was invited to speak about my thoughts on states' rights. I don't think decisions like that should be made at the federal level. They should be determined at the state level. It's not something I personally am supportive of.
What grade would you give Governor Beshear for his 2 terms in office?
You know, I'd be generous to give him a D, but I'll give him a D. Steve Beshear is a good man. I think he has a good heart, and I know his wife Jane as well. I used to be chairman of the board for the American Red Cross for this region of the country, and worked closely with her and with him at times on different issues. I don't think he's been an effective leader. I think that we have dropped the ball economically in this state. It has come at a price that's going to be very heavy for us to bear. We've ignored the pension crisis. It has gotten worse. We've allowed many employers to leave. We've allowed the EPA to step all over us without standing up for ourselves and using the sovereignty that we have as a state. We've expanded Medicaid to the point that now 1 out of 4 people are on Medicaid in this state, and we think that's good, but it's not because we can't afford it. We've jumped into Common Core as an educational platform. This was before the standards were even written. It has not been serving our young people well. So at many turns I see that he has rushed into things that we probably should not have, and we have failed to lead on things where we should have. So I'm personally not too impressed with him. If I were grading him, I wouldn't give him a very high grade at this point.
Unemployment rates have gone down in Kentucky recently, but the counties with the highest rates are right here in eastern Kentucky. What will you do to bring more jobs specifically to eastern Kentucky?
You know, I was asked at the SOAR Summit, the very first one at the end of 2013, December of 2013, I was asked a question, what could I do as an elected official, or what would I propose that the government do to help the people of eastern Kentucky as it relates to job creation and other things? And what I said then is the same thing I say now. Given the fact that as a state we're broke, and the federal government is broke, we're borrowing money hand over fist, the better question we need to ask is what can the government stop doing to the people of eastern Kentucky? We've got to stop suffocating job creation. We overregulate things to death. It starts with the EPA. That's at a federal level. But as a governor, I have made very clear that not only will I not submit a plan to comply with CO2 cuts, which they're asking us to do volitionally, I will not do this as governor. I will also not comply with anything that we are not legally bound to comply with at the state level. We've got to start looking out for the best interests of Kentuckians. This has got to be the focus not only of a governor, but frankly, of every elected official in this state. I am a guy I know how to create jobs. I've done this. I have folks that work for me, men and women who don't even have a GED, others who have PhDs. I've hired people all over the spectrum, but I understand what it takes to create a job. I understand how increasingly difficult it is for job creators in the state of Kentucky to do it here, and how tempting it is to go to places like Tennessee or Indiana to start those companies.
You mentioned you were at the first SOAR summit. You did not attend the most recent one. Your opponent was there. Do you support the SOAR initiative, and will you work with Congressman Rogers to continue this effort?
Absolutely. I was scheduled to go to this last one, but it got canceled due to weather, unfortunately. And when it was rescheduled, unfortunately, I was already double booked that day. Absolutely support it. I'm very committed to this part of the country. I grew up in the mountains. I didn't grow up in Kentucky, but I grew up in the mountains. I grew up in an environment very similar to this, very economically challenged. A lot of people on various benefits, a lot of drugs, poor cell coverage. Everything that you deal with here is exactly where I grew up. I left when I was 18 and never went back because there was no opportunity. So I am very sympathetic to this because it's something that I'm also empathetic to. I'm very committed to this region. I will continue to work for broadening the opportunities through the SOAR Summit and beyond, and looking for ways that we can make this an environment where people are incented to actually create opportunity.
Well, one big project that's come out of SOAR is extending the Mountain Parkway. What other roads in eastern Kentucky would you like to see improved?
This is a big one, as you know. I mean, that's a $750 million project. You could almost say, what road would you not want to see improved? I mean, honestly, there's some of them that would be great to see them straightened if it were possible. It's not as simple as that. And so much of this is going to be constrained by dollars as well. There are other roads that have already been put on my plate as ones that people would like to see as a priority. If I were to mention them, I'll only cause people to send other ones as well. At the end of the day, both here in eastern Kentucky, in the central part of the state, and in western Kentucky as well as in the north, there are any number of roads and bridges that need to be addressed. As part of the budgeting process, we will look at these as we look at the roads and bridges across the state.
Would improving infrastructure in eastern Kentucky be a top priority for you?
Improving infrastructure in the state will be a top priority. I know who I'm talking to. I know the audience. I'm not going to gratuitously say that yes, and then get on a radio station or a TV station in western Kentucky and tell them the same thing. I mean, the fact is we have a limited number of dollars. We need to look across the board at how we can best employ them. Do I understand what an impact it will have in this part of the state if we expand the roads? Absolutely. The cell coverage? Absolutely. Are these going to be priorities? Yes. Will they be the top priority? I can't commit to that at this point.
You've said you will dismantle Kentucky's healthcare exchange if you're elected. Why, and what would you do instead?
What I've made clear is that in year one, 2016, we will transition everybody from the state level Obamacare exchange, which is the Connect exchange,
right,
to the federal level exchange. 37 states, I believe, already use the federal exchange. We're one of only a few states that actually has a state-run exchange. We don't need it. There's nothing we offer to our citizens at the state level that they can't get at the federal level. The only thing we guarantee is that it's going to cost taxpayers in this state more. So what I've proposed is during the open enrollment period of 2016, we will, in an orderly fashion, transition people from the state exchange to the federal exchange. They will get the very same things they have access to at the state exchange. And then we will eliminate the redundancy. We don't need the redundant effort at the cost of hundreds of millions of dollars to taxpayers in the state. And so at the end of 2016, before the federal subsidies run out and the cost begins, we will go ahead and eliminate this program.
Let's talk about some other topics that you've voiced your support for. Right to work law.
Yes.
Why is that needed?
Right to work has become a litmus test in the South in particular, but in this country increasingly. Now the entire manufacturing corridor from Wisconsin down to the Gulf is right to work except for Kentucky. Wisconsin, Michigan, Indiana, not us, and then down into the South with Alabama and Mississippi. We are the only state in the South that doesn't have right-to-work legislation. There's concern. I have friends that work in unions that feel that this is somehow a threat to them. It's not. Interestingly, the states in which union membership is actually increasing in America, the 5 states in which it has increased the fastest in the last 2 years, every one of them is a right-to-work state. The #1 state in the union for job increases for union members is actually in Tennessee, 25% increase. Because where there are jobs, there are shops to be unionized and those that won't be. And in fact, many of the companies that pass us by to go to a state that's right to work end up becoming union shops. This isn't a way to prevent people from having good opportunities with union jobs. But we know for a fact if we don't pass right to work, we will lose out on the Volvos who just passed us by and went to South Carolina. We can't afford it. A union job is only good if it actually exists. And increasingly in the state of Kentucky, they don't exist. We've got to reverse that tide. We've got to start being a state that is attractive to job creators to be able to come here.
You've obviously voiced your support for shrinking the size of state government. What are your specific proposals in regards to that?
I mean, it'll start by leading by example. I'm a former military officer. You lead by example. That's one thing I learned. And it'll start by having a staff that's 20% smaller than that of the current governor's administration, at a minimum. And we will start departmentally to lead in that way. We can be more efficient. We have more than 85,000 full-time equivalents. And some quibble with that number, but I'm telling you, you look across the board at the FTEs for state employees, it's too large. We can't afford the size and scope of government. So what we'll do is we'll actually have a hiring freeze. I'm not looking to eliminate positions. In fact, nowhere have I ever called for that. We will use attrition, retirement, natural, attrition to shrink the size of government until we're back to 2007 levels. So over the course of the next months, as those numbers come down, we'll let these numbers go back to a more manageable size. Other than health and safety related positions, I'm not looking to replace any of the people that retire. We can operate on a leaner government.
You've already mentioned overhauling the public pension system. How in the world do you tackle that?
I'm the only one in this race that's ever worked in the pension business, and it's critical. I mean, we've got to have somebody who understands the issue. 12, 15 years ago, we were fully funded across the board. It's unfortunate that we have created this problem by failing to make required contributions and then misallocating monies and misappropriating them and putting them to other use to balance budgets. This has got to end. The first thing we need to do is freeze the existing plan. We must legally and morally fulfill the obligations to our retired state employees. And this is what I'm committed to doing. They have been promised a pension. They will get that pension. And those that are in the plan right now have been promised that, and they will get it. But the only way they'll get it is if we stop adding people to it. For new hirees, we cannot go to a defined benefit plan. We cannot go to the cash balance plan with a guaranteed rate of return from a couple of years ago. This is not affordable because the people that are guaranteeing that rate of return, they don't have a guaranteed rate of return. There are fewer and fewer taxpayers. So we've got to move to a 401k type plan. We've got to move to a defined contribution plan for new hirees, starting as soon as my administration would take effect. That would also afford them the ability to transport that money. People aren't going to then be obligated to stay for their 20 or 25 or 30 years, as the case may be. They could work 14 years and decide, hey, I want to go into the private sector, and they could, just like those of us in the private sector, take their retirement with them in an IRA and a self-funded 401k. At that point, they could roll it over into their own plan. So we will give people more flexibility and affordability. We also need to audit every one of our retirement plans. We don't really have a full understanding of what's going on. I think people, taxpayers in particular, your viewers, will be outraged when they see just what type of mismanagement has occurred. And so I think at several levels, we've got to be smarter about the way in which we approach this. Every dollar that we save by doing this is one more dollar that takes us one more day, week, month down the road and ensures that we will meet the obligations that we've made to people.
Charter schools. You've said you support charter schools. Tell me about
I do. Public charters in particular. Let's walk before we run. We need school choice in Kentucky. We're one of only 7 states that does not allow any competition for our federal tax dollars, or our state tax dollars as it relates to public education. One of only 7 states. We're not doing well on education. We're not. We're at the bottom of nearly every list we'd like to be at the top of. This has got to change. Competition is a good thing. It's healthy. We saw it in this primary. Competition brings a sense of energy and vigor to things that is very helpful. We need the same as it relates to our public education dollars. So let's start with our failing schools. Start with some of our urban schools that have just been perennially failing. And let's start to inject some competition there. Let's bring in some public charter schools. I mean, it's the same tax dollars, but let's give parents some choice. Let the dollars start to follow the parents. Let's re-empower the local school district, the local communities, the local superintendents, the local principals and teachers. They know how to educate. We've turned our teachers into administrators. They do nothing but teach to the test now because they're tested on the test. They themselves are measured based on how their students do on the test. This is not how we educate. We're falling farther and farther behind other states and behind the industrialized world. We've got to be smarter. We know how to educate young people. We have a lot of great teachers. We need to let them start teaching again.
You have obviously a lot of lofty goals. How confident are you can work with the legislature to get these things done?
It's a good question. I mean, if you notice, if you again go to mattbevin.com, look at our blueprint for a better Kentucky. There's 7 key points. They're very simple. They're straightforward, but they're very specific. There's an old saying, if you chase 2 rabbits, you won't catch either one of them. And that's true. If you chase 7 rabbits, you won't catch them either. So you run those little suckers down one at a time. It's basically how it's going to be done. And so we will pick one and we'll run it down. And some of these things will go in tangent with one another. They'll go along at the same time. But how confident am I that I can work with the legislature? Very. Because my entire life I've had to deal with people from very disparate backgrounds, people of differences of opinion. I did it in the military. I've done it in the private sector. This is the success that I've had in building companies comes from doing things where people say this can't be done or you can't work with this group and finding a way to make that happen. The legislature is divided right now. I'm not convinced that it will be for the long term, but certainly in 2016 for this next biennial budget, it will be. So it's going to be imperative that we sit down with Republicans and Democrats. One thing that I know is this. Democrats and Republicans both want opportunities for their children and grandchildren. They want jobs. They want better education. They want better health care. All these things matter regardless of party. This is how we'll get things done.
One key difference between you and your opponent is the issue of same-sex marriage, and the U.S. Supreme Court is expected to issue a major ruling in the next few weeks. What would you do or could you do as governor if the court rules that same-sex marriage is legal across the country?
I'm not going to hypothesize on what they'll do. They are going to make a ruling, literally, as you noted, very shortly. That may render some of this discussion moot. One thing I've made clear is that we are a nation of laws, and I do believe that. There are other laws as it relates to the life issue. I'm very strongly pro-life. My opponent is not. And yet there are laws right now that we must comply with, whether I agree with them or not. As governor, my responsibility is to ensure that we uphold the law. But where something is not legally binding upon us as a state, I will not uphold it. So I'll cross that bridge as we come to it, but I do believe that marriage is a contract between one man, one woman, and God. I don't think government defined the role of marriage. I don't think government should be in the business of redefining the role of marriage. And frankly, I think it's a level that should be decided at the state level, not at the federal government.
So would you say you agree with Governor Beshear's decision to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to defend Kentucky's same-sex marriage ban in court?
I agree with the fact that it's being defended because that was the obligation of our current Attorney General, who abrogated his responsibility. He sat there and cried before us and told us that because he personally disagreed with it, he wasn't going to do his job. We're still paying his salary. The idea that he would think he should run now for a higher level of office is ridiculous to me. When he didn't even, I took an oath as a military officer to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States. I didn't have the option of choosing when and where I would choose to actually follow that oath, nor did he as Attorney General. He has absolutely broken his oath and wants us to forget about it. Do I think that it's the right thing that we should be defending the Constitution? Yes. But we shouldn't be defending it with private taxpayer dollars being spent on private attorneys. Unfortunately, that's what we're forced with because our Attorney General is not doing his job.
Could you ever see yourself supporting a raise in the minimum wage?
This is what I believe. I believe in higher wages, but higher wages come because of competition. Here's what I would challenge you to do. And for those of you that are watching, walk into any coffee shop, walk into your local florist, walk into any small mom and pop shop, any small hardware store, whatever the case may be. Ask a small restaurant, what would an increase in the minimum wage do to their business? They will tell you straight up to a person that it would decimate them. If we know that raising the minimum wage arbitrarily will destroy jobs, and at the lowest levels of the rungs of the ladder where we most desperately need them, why would we force that through? Do I like the idea of paying people more than the minimum wage? Absolutely. I employ dozens and dozens and dozens of people. Not a single one of my employees makes the minimum wage. They're all paid more than that because I make it a priority to do so, but not because I'm forced to do so, because I make sure that I prioritize the profits that we generate as a company to plow as much as I can back into my people, because frankly, that's my greatest asset. But the way we get higher wages is to create competition for employees. You create competition by having a strong economy, by having labor laws and tax structure. One thing we haven't talked about, the tax structure in the state has got to be revamped. We're overtaxing people to death, and we have fewer and fewer people carrying more and more of the burden. So I'm a big believer in higher wages, absolutely. And I'm going to do everything in my power as a governor to do what I've done as an employer.
Only a couple minutes left, unfortunately. What's your vision for the future of Eastern Kentucky? Do you think we need to focus more on tourism? Do you think the coal industry is coming back? Just kind of give me your general idea about what you see for the future of Eastern Kentucky.
I think it's severalfold. I mean, coal is still the #1 producer of electricity in this country, and in the state, certainly, over 90% even now of our electricity. Never in the history of the world has been there more demand for coal than there is now. Never. How is it that we're not participating in Kentucky? So the idea that coal is dead is wrong. I disagree with that, and I will not just be a friend of coal. I will fight to ensure that we mine coal and that we produce electricity with coal here in this state. We should have coal-fired power plants because we're sitting right on top of it. So coal is and should continue to be, and into the foreseeable future will be, a key part of our economy. Tourism is also important, but goes back to roads and cell coverage and things that people expect in order to be able to find how beautiful it is here. We're very blessed here in Eastern Kentucky with extraordinary resources that many people don't even know exist. So we've got to make sure we do a better job of advertising what we have. Some people like the fact that you can't take a 4-lane highway into somewhere. They want to be a little bit removed. But when they get there, they want to be able to have certain amenities. So I think we need to do a better job of enhancing people's awareness of what a gift we have here in Eastern Kentucky as it relates to tourism. And then other business as well. Frankly, it shouldn't be just coal or tourism. We've got to encourage more small businesses to take the risk. We do that by not regulating them to death and not taxing them to death.
All right, Matt Bevin, we're out of time.
Thank you.
Have you back on again before
I look
the
forward
election.
to it. Thank you so
very
much.
And thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time on Issues and Answers.